All right. Well, I think then perhaps we will kick off. Still a few people dialing in, but I've got some intros to do anyway. So, hello, everyone. Thanks ever so much for joining us. My name's Kate. I head up the global talent team here at Employment Hero. We have about 1,500 heroes worldwide now, which is crazy. And more than 60 of those are based over in New Zealand. It is a really important region for Employment Hero, and particularly one with a lot of unique nuances when it comes to attracting and retaining talent. So super excited to be engaging with a lot of our local audience today, and also some really brilliant local speakers who've got a huge amount of experience in that market. Now, today's webinar is all about workplace culture. So how to build it, how to maintain it, and how to harness it to attract the best possible talent and create a really productive, high-performing team. So joining us today, we've got two really wonderful panelists. We've got Angela Lim, who is the CEO of Clearhead, and Layamon Bakewell, who's the CEO of Pets in the City, who I'll hand over to introduce themselves in a moment. Before we kick off, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please type your questions in the box down the bottom of your Zoom screens, and we'll endeavour to get as many as we can answered during the discussion towards the end of the call. For any that we don't get to, we'll seek to answer them after the webinar. And I'd also like to note that today's session is being recorded. So both the recording and any relevant follow-up links will be made available to everyone after the webinar has concluded. And with that out the way, I think perhaps we'll get into the juicy stuff, the details. So welcome both. Think that it would be fantastic if you could briefly introduce yourselves and share a little bit about both yourselves and also the cultures at your organization. So Angela, we'll kick off with you, please.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, my name is Angela. I trained as a medical doctor before I started Clearhead 6 years ago. The mission really is to make mental health support accessible through the use of technology, and it's been a wonderful journey. And we've recently partnered with Employment Hero as well, so that some of Employment Hero's customers can get free access to Clearhead. So we're super excited about that. But yeah, in terms of the exercise we did with it was a good good excuse for me to reach out to my team and say, let's do a quick culture check-in and see where we're at. And yeah, the culture was predominantly described by three words in our company. One is collaborative, the second is fun, and the third is that, we're very flexible, and all of that in service of the mission of what we do. So yeah, it was nice to see sort of the culture in some ways being very consistent as well, and maintaining that. So we can talk about that in today's webinar as well.
Fabulous. And so how did you actually get the feedback from everyone? Was it a survey? Was it like a group session, a call with you all?
Yeah, I actually did it as a group session, just as a nice way to kind of get that qualitative feedback as well. And it was nice for people to kind of hear from others around what made them stay at Clearhead and what attracted them. And yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Really excited to have you and really excited about our partnership as well. Now handing over to Layman, could you introduce yourself and a little bit more about the culture at Pets in the City?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. My name's Layman. I'm the CEO of Pets in the City. My background, I actually did 19 years in the Royal New Zealand Navy. And then one day in 2020, I woke up and I was like, I want to do something different. And so we started looking at businesses to buy. And we came across this really, really cool brand called Pets in the City. And it's kind of like, how crazy would that be to leave my career in the Navy and do something completely different and run a doggy daycare? So yeah, it was 2020. We started as franchisees, and then in 2022, we got the opportunity to take over as the franchisor in the flagship site in Wairau Park. So we did. And so over the last 2 years, we've gone through this major sort of cultural journey, getting Pets in the City to the point it's at now, and we're really gearing up to franchise and grow the brand. But before we did that, we had to make sure we had the foundation right, and a key part of that was sorting out the culture, and keen to chat a bit more about that today. But I guess you can sum up our culture with my whole philosophy is to keep it simple. It's dog daycare. It doesn't need to be complicated. So we want to keep it simple. We want it to be easy for customers, easy for staff, and easy to love. So everything we've done over the last couple of years, getting to the point we're at now, is about that focus on making sure we've got the right tools, Employment Hero being a key part of that. Yeah, and making it a great place to work and a great culture. And yeah, it's gone really well.
From the Navy to pets in the city, big career pivot there.
Yeah, crazy. Like absolutely crazy. Going from driving warships to running dog daycares is, yeah, it's a big shift, but like I wouldn't have it any other way. It's Yeah, I've got one of the most fun jobs in the world. I really do have the best job in the world. But it kind of so my wife, who's my business partner, is also ex-Navy, and what it's allowed us to do is take a bunch of those leadership skills that we learnt in the Navy over our careers, and all that good stuff we learnt about workplace culture and how to create high performing teams, and take that into the business world. So it's actually been a really, really useful pivot.
Yeah, awesome. That's such an interesting perspective to have for the webinar today. So thanks so much and lovely to have you. Before we get into the Q&A session, I'd like to maybe start by just setting the scene a little bit for everyone dialing in. So in 2023, Employment Hero did a study on the state of recruitment, and there were some really interesting findings, including, firstly, that it's more expensive to advertise and hire candidates in New Zealand than it is in Australia. This is driven by a couple of different factors, but in part the local labour shortages in New Zealand. So hiring in New Zealand can be A, really hard, and B, quite expensive. And then we also produced a Wellness at Work report last year and found that burnout is on the rise. So when we ran the report in 2022, 53% of respondents had felt burnt out at work within the last 3 months. And in 2024, that number shot up to 61%. We also found that as a result of that, more than half of Gen Z and millennials are taking stress leave due to burnout. So I think the headline here is really that A, it can be difficult to attract new talent and also expensive to do that. And then in addition to that, a good portion of existing staff are experiencing burnout, which could impact their performance and their productivity. So that's kind of the backdrop to today's session and why we feel it's such an important topic. Angela, I would love to hear from your perspective why you think workplace culture is so important and how the right workplace culture can combat some of these issues.
Yeah. I think first, what is culture, right? So culture is what you do, not what you say. And so it's basically when you look at your organization, how people behave with each other, with themselves, that's often shaped by the beliefs that exist in the organization, the values that are promoted, and how, things like incentives, they drive what type of behaviors is actually accepted. So it's really important to recognize that culture is something that's living and something that is absolutely can be intentionally created. In saying that, I think when we look at the context of what you've just framed around burnout, so Clearhead is an EAP provider, and so we work with hundreds of companies across New Zealand and Australia, and so we get to see, as you said, that about 2/3 of people report some level of burnout at some point in time, and often that burnout could actually be mitigated much earlier through, for example, having a culture that allows people to reach out for help early, through having a culture where it's not a stigma to say, actually, I'm struggling because of XYZ. And it could be personal reasons, it could be professional reasons. And when we talk about culture being what you do, then really thinking about when you say you care about people's well-being, do you actually have support tools in place that allows people to maintain their well-being, whether that's the way the job's designed, whether it's the way that, whether it's accessible to get professional help through your EAP. All these things are constantly telling your employees what you value, what you care about, and therefore what you promote. And so that's kind of the things that we've learned in the context of why workplace culture is really important, because it basically drives what you want to see in the organization internally, and then that obviously reflects in the outcomes and outputs that you want to achieve in your organization. And so I'll give you a couple more stats as well. So we know, for example, more broadly, 1 in 5 individuals will struggle with their mental health every year. And yet when we looked at the percentage of people that uses support, it's less than 3%. So there's a big disconnect there around people who need that support and whether they're gonna get it. And then when we think about our informal layers, like our managers who can be that conduit for us, 52% don't feel comfortable speaking to their managers about their struggles. So, there are all these factors that actually we have to be very conscious of that we need to tackle if you want to create the type of culture that you want in order to prevent young people, especially, from becoming burnt out and then taking stress leave. And then obviously you having the difficulty of managing that in the organization. So all to say is that don't feel hopeless. There are things that you can do, but then, you have to invest in being very intentional about it.
Gosh, 1 in 5, that is high. So there are probably, myself included, but there are probably a lot of other people listening to this thinking there are probably a huge number of people that work for us that presumably then are in that position and we're just not aware of it.
100%.
Gosh, okay. Well, thank you for sharing and some really good insights and stats there. Layman, I'd love to also hear your thoughts. So why is workplace culture important and how can it be used to combat some of these issues around, difficult to hire, attrition, productivity, etc.?
Yeah, we went through a phase a couple of years ago when I first took over as franchisor where we had really, really high turnover. Massive. We lost about 18 people in 12 months and with a relatively small team. And so we had to do a lot of work and try and figure out why that was happening. And a lot of people, when they apply to work for us and start working for us, they think it's going to be patting puppies all day. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of patting puppies, and that's great, but there's also a lot of cleaning, a lot of paperwork. We keep really good records on all our dogs. And it can also be quite monotonous when you're on shift looking after a group of dogs, like that's you for that 6-hour shift. And there's not really any interaction with other staff during that shift. You're just with the dogs. So we went away and we thought, right, firstly, staff need to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, not just turning up to work every day to look after dogs. Like, what's the mission? What are they buying into? What are we trying to achieve as a company? So that was a big part about what we did. So the other reason I really think we've had some success with workplace culture is what we've seen is a lot of burnout and stress in young people. We employ a lot of young people. Um, I believe can be attributed to a lack of connection in modern society. People are spending more and more time on their phones rather than connecting with other humans. And what we kind of strived ourselves to be was a modern workplace where this is where they make their friends, a lot of the young people that work for us. This is where they have most of those interactions with other people. So it was really important to us that we created that this experience was a positive and supportive experience for them. So we've got a workplace anti-bullying culture policy, for example, that we're huge on, and everyone gets briefed on day one because it's something that Laura and I, coming from our background in the Navy, will not stand for. So for us, the importance of culture was about making it a fun, positive, and supportive environment for the young people that work for us to turn up to each day. And then what that's kind of translated into is very little sick leave now and very little time off, which is kind of a trend we've seen over the last couple of years as well.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. So some really good kind of pragmatic tips in there around being super clear about your mission and communicating that with employees. Will be good to delve a little bit deeper into how you actually built that sense of connection. Are there some kind of tactics that you use that you can share with us, of kind of what you've rolled out and how it's worked?
So it started about a while, probably 3 years ago now. I sat down and wrote the Pets in the City Culture Code, and that's a really cool document. I'm super passionate about it. It's 60 slides. It lays out exactly what the Pets in the City culture is. but I'm also very aware that I'm probably the only person in Pets in the City that's passionate about it, and probably the only person who ever reads it. So I think it's a good starting point to write it down and I guess define what you want your culture to be. But young people won't buy into that. They certainly won't read it. We brief it as part of our onboarding and induction process, and we communicate it from day one. But what's really important is you actually need to live those core values as the business leader and live that culture. And the other thing I found is use it in all my communication with my team as well. I think where I've seen it go wrong in the past is you write down your mission, values, culture statement, and then it gets hidden away in a file on a computer somewhere and it's never comes out again. And the business leader thinks, cool, we've got an awesome culture. That's not it. A word I like to use is culturing. Culturing's constant, it's ongoing. So for us, it was important to write it down, but the actual bit that really makes a difference is living and breathing those core values every day and holding our team accountable to those core values as well.
I'm also happy to share in terms of your question around driving connection in the context of like our workforce is 90% remote. And so how do you build that connection when everyone's distributed, everyone's not meeting in person that frequently? So I think two things that we do. One is ensuring that people are aligned, that they know what's going on. So we have a weekly all hands where we are regularly updating people on what's going on in the business. So they're not met, finding it out themselves without the proper narrative and context. And the other thing is obviously updating on the progress. So we all like to feel like we're coming to work for a reason and we're not just pushing papers. And so, being able to have the team all report on how they're making progress every fortnight. I think that really builds a sense of like we're in it together, we're doing something meaningful, and here's how we're moving the needle on our mission or our vision. And then we always end the all hands with a game in which we all kind of play. We play something called Draw Battle, where people can get quite competitive around it. It's some form of like online Pictionary kind of thing, basically. And so, yeah, so that kind of brings that fun, that kind of helps people, because obviously working in the mental health space can be quite heavy. And so learning how to laugh at what we do. And I think just having the ability to banter and give everyone, give each other good-natured ribbing really builds that connection, both from a professional and a personal perspective. So yeah, that's kind of how we sort of build connection in a remote workforce.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, guys. And I think there's two good ideas that could be combined there. If anyone's listening and you're thinking, we struggle to attract talent, we do have high turnover, I don't really know how we would define our culture. There's probably a couple of things that could be combined there. Step one being, as Layamon suggested, actually documenting what you want your culture to be. This is how we want the organizational culture to feel and look and be for those that work here. And then maybe doing what you suggested earlier, Angela, which is actually like getting on a call or using a survey or something to ask your employees what their experience of the culture is at the moment and are they matching up, and if not, then I think that sort of forms some of the strategy around where you need to focus and how to turn things around. Fabulous. Well, thank you both for sharing. Would love to delve a little bit deeper, I suppose, into the separate aspects that we've talked about. So starting off with talent attraction, if there are any organizations out there that are really struggling to hire, how can they use their workplace culture to attract the right talent? What has worked for both of you over the years? And Angela, maybe we'll stick with you to start.
Yeah, if I think about it consistently, it has just been our mission. I think just being very good at telling your story of like why you exist in the world. Because the truth is, yes, there are lots of companies and jobs out there. So why you? So I think, remembering that recruitment is not one-sided. It's you have to convince them as well the best talent to join you, not just them convincing you why you should hire them. So I think that's been what's consistent across the years. It's having a very clear social mission that people resonate with. And obviously, as you mentioned, the younger generation continues to have mental health as a challenge. And so we really are solving a problem that is feels very existential for a lot of people. And so I think they feel like they're doing their bit.
And Layamon, when we were talking at the start, I think you were saying that partly due to the fact that there are pets involved, you guys can get a huge number of applications sometimes. So I suppose I'm interested to know from your standpoint, is there something to be said for actually deterring the wrong candidates as well? So for example, if you have a really high performance culture, do you think it's good to publicize that so that candidates that maybe don't feel that's the right fit for them will self-select out?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I'd say is a good culture we've found is quite contagious. So my staff tell their friends how fun it is to work for Pets in the City, for example. We tell their friends, and we're in a relatively small industry, so we've got a good reputation as a good employer, which goes a long way in helping. Um, Things we do though is on our careers page on our website, I publish our culture code and publicly available. Um, and I do that as a upfront that, hey, if you want to work for us, these are our mission, this is our mission, values, and this is the type of workplace we're striving to create. So just being transparent upfront of the type of workplace we're trying to create. We get about 10 applicants through that web page a week, which is really, really cool. Yeah, works well.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, we're similar. We have a culture or a DNA doc, the EH way, which we share and publish really openly. And I think it's been really beneficial. So for any other listeners who maybe haven't tried that yet, really recommend it to help with talent attraction, but also just being really clear and making sure that if someone's not aligned with the culture and the way that you work, you're as transparent as that upfront as you can be. Now, the second challenge really is staff retention. So would love to hear both of your top tips for improving staff retention if it is a significant challenge for people. So Layman, maybe sticking with you, what, in your view, what's sort of the number one thing that an organization could do to really improve that?
Um, a few things. So the first thing was do what you say you're going to do as an employer. It sounds really, really simple, but in my experience, the quickest way to lose your team is if you let other staff, if you don't call out other staff that are not living up to your culture, that are not living up to your values. And if you say one thing that you're trying to create a high performance culture, that you've got really high standards, and this is what it means to be part of Pets in the City, but then you let some other staff, you don't call them out when they don't demonstrate that behavior, you lose your team really, really quickly. And it's quite simple, but yeah, so I'll be honest, I'm not a massive fan of confrontation, so I don't like calling out people when they're late for work, for example, or um, you know, whatever it is. But what I've found is if I don't, then your high performance get really, really upset that other people are not are getting away with stuff. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing I've learned. The other sort of super simple stuff. I've had staff start working for me that have said, "Oh, you put your roster out a month in advance. We got our roster the day before at our previous job," and so things like that is actually telling people when they're going to work. It sounds so simple, but so many workplaces out there don't publish their roster more than a couple of days in advance, which I was quite blown away with when I get told this sort of stuff. Um, Pay people on time, approve leave requests in a timely manner, like really simple, practical stuff. But a saying from my time in the Navy is uncertainty rots the soul. So if you don't know where you're working the following week, it kind of eats away at you and you can't plan your life. You can't plan other social engagements, you can't plan medical appointments, etc., and just get on with the rest of your life. So just really, really basic stuff, but let people know when they're going to work and hold people accountable.
Yeah, certainly. So for people who've maybe now built that culture deck, making sure that what is happening in practice is not different to what's actually written down there and that the organization is holding itself to that standard. Brilliant. Okay. And Angela, what about you? Any top tips?
Yeah, I mean, like, ultimately, an organization is simply a collection of human beings, and human beings just want to be treated like human beings. And so, just taking an approach of like being really caring to the individual, and then taking action that demonstrates it, whether it's the support that you put in place, that kind of stuff. If people feel cared for, then they will go above and beyond to support the organization. But I actually want to throw a bit of I guess, a devil's advocate perspective, which is I think it's okay to also use your culture to not retain the wrong people. So when I think about Clearhead's, I guess, journey over the last few years, we have a bit more of almost like a camelback type of curve where people either stay with us in a very short period of time, like a few months, or they stay with us for years. And to me, that is actually success because, you know, it means that both parties, both you as the employer as well as the employee that joins, becomes very clear of like what is the expectation to work in this organization, to achieve the outcomes that we care about, to work in a way that is conducive for everyone. And if for whatever reason it's not a fit, it's not that they are bad human beings, it's just that they're not a fit. And it's totally okay. It's not a failure on either party's side to kind of just say, actually, this is not for me. And actually, I think it takes a lot of courage to be able to be self-aware to do that. So highly encourage actually that that if people are not the right fit, to actually have that honest conversation, because you're doing them a favor as well to not see them struggle in an environment that actually is not a good fit for them. So that's kind of the other thing to be mindful of. I think it's really important, and just constantly having that conversation around what can we do to support you to be a good fit, but if it's not a good fit, nothing personal. And I think just being mindful of doing that in the context of, being still an inclusive environment. I think it's, even though we're very proud of our culture being quite stable, because we sort of advocate for these values, and the people that work here represent those values, you also have to be making sure that you're not creating an environment in which everyone just looks the same or sounds the same or thinks the same. And so and not to have people be pushed out because they just it's very homogeneous, so that's the balance that you're trying to strike.
Yeah, I completely agree. I hope that that's not too controversial, but yeah, I mean, if it's not a fit on both sides, then better to have the conversation sooner rather than later, I think. I'm glad that you sort of segued into some more spicy topics and controversial opinions there, Angela, because it leads quite nicely into my next question, which is I would love to understand from both of you, what are some of the biggest mistakes that organizations make when it comes to workplace culture? And I'll start with you, Angela, because I'm sure you've got a lot of quite unique insights here, given the space that you guys operate in.
Yeah, I think look, it's the stuff that Layman also mentioned, which is just when your actions don't match what you say, or don't match what you say your values are, and being able to be accountable as an employer to the things that you say. Trust is ultimately what you're trying to create in this environment, in order to foster a positive culture. And trust comes from the ability for people to have transparent information flows. Trust comes from a space where people can speak up without having any sort of direct or indirect repercussions. Trust comes from being able to put your hands up and get support without being let down or being sort of judged. So I think those organizations that don't do that is kind of the organizations where they foster a culture that ends up driving either perverse outcomes or not the type of environment you would feel comfortable in.
Yeah, for sure. And Layman, how about you? Biggest mistakes that you think organizations can make when it comes to workplace culture?
Yeah, so I touched on it before around holding people accountable to your culture and not, but I'll just pick up on something Angela said earlier about the importance of communication. One of the, so often in workplaces, an issue that's really, really small for the business owner or the manager can become quite a big deal in someone's head, and they can stew on it. And so, giving people lots of opportunities to being approachable as the manager, as the business owner. I've had so many examples in the last couple of years where someone's been really, really nervous to come and speak to me, and in their head, they've worked something up to be like this really big deal. And it's like, oh, it's no big deal at all. Of course we can do that, you know. And they're like, really? And it's like, yeah, easy, yeah. Um, so it's just creating that environment where you are approachable, where nothing's off limits, to have an open and frank discussion, and being honest and genuine in your approach to your employees. Yeah, so it's really important to us. We're really open and transparent with our team as well about what's going on at Pets in the City, how we're doing as a business, where we're going in the future, etc. But yeah, just being open to those discussions. Something really, really practical, that makes a real big difference for us is just having regular staff meetings. It's so easy for me or the team to postpone staff meetings or skip staff meetings because they're a pain. Um, but that's when we have issues in the team, and it's the team functions so much better when we have regular staff meetings, and it gives everyone an ongoing opportunity to air any issues that are going on.
I just
Mm.
want to maybe sort of close off with what Layman said, which is that I think you can, as a leader, kind of say, oh, I'm very approachable, but actually people, as Layman said, have built in their head some level of social hierarchy, whether even if you're quite a flat organization. And so I'm always like, oh, as the CEO, my door is always open, come to me, you know, I'm very open to feedback, all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, for a whole bunch of reasons, people might just not trust that because they might have had negative experiences in other organizations. So they might learn other things that may not exist in your organization, but that's something they've ingested as, oh, if I want to survive in an organization, I have to do this. And so I think often when we think about having channels in which you at a leadership level can get what's actually going on in the business to be able to make the changes you need, is actually recognizing who are informally leaders, who are the ones that people feel actually safe to go and have those conversations with. And rather than just have it all be back chatter, actually build that relationship with those individuals so that they become your conduit. And often people want that information to flow through. They just don't want to be the person directly saying it. So being really, again, intentional about how you allow for information flow.
Yeah, and I know at Employment Hero that we use anonymous engagement surveys, particularly given just the size of organization that we are now. It's good to get a bit of a pulse check. Have you got any strong views on that? Do you think there are some good benefits to anonymous employee engagement surveys? Do you think things should always be associated with the employee's name? What do you think? And maybe Angela, we'll start with you.
Oh, I don't know. And this is why we're going down that controversial stuff. So I think that it's really important that any organization do have tools in which that information flow can come through. And as Kate mentioned, Employment Hero has tools on there that can help you. I think in the context of your specific question around anonymity, I think what is sometimes challenging with that is the ability in which you can either, one, understand whether the information, the feedback that you're getting, is it one person giving you feedback 10 times, or is it 10 different people giving you a similar feedback? So sometimes that anonymity can be challenging to kind of understand. And then I think the other thing that I think most organizations want to be able to feel they can do is like, you know, directly address the issue that has been brought up for the individual and then think about it in a broader systemic way. And so I think sometimes the challenge with anonymity again is you can't work directly with the individual if you have, you know, in a safe space, right? Obviously, if you have a bit of a toxic environment and that is being used to persecute the individual, then that's not cool. So it's really just thinking about like the balance of being able to allow people a safe way in which to share things that might be very difficult to share, while still being able to be very pragmatic as an organization around how you prioritize where you focus your energy on when trying to make the organization a better place.
It always makes me wonder as well. There are so many data points around, you know, people, for example, when they're using social media and are commenting on things can often be a lot ruder than they might be in person and not frame things quite as nicely because you've got that kind of screen effect. And I do sometimes wonder if it's an anonymous survey. I don't know, but I wonder if people might not frame the feedback as constructively. Conversely, I think there's a huge benefit to the safety almost of an anonymity, and making sure that they are confident enough to share their thoughts honestly. Layamon, have you got any strong views on that? And do you guys use any anonymous engagement survey tools?
Yeah, we do. We use anonymous, uh, an anonymous quarterly survey. The only thing I've really got to add is I look at trends more than individual data points. Track trends over time, because you can get the odd, person who's having a particularly bad day and submit some really negative feedback or some negative comments. And I think it's important to give people an outlet to do that. So you do get a feel, but I guess I don't start getting concerned unless I'm seeing trends over time that it's consistent. Why not? Yeah.
Well, final question from me before we move on to Q&A. We've already got a couple of questions that have come through. For anyone else that's got any in mind, please add them to the Q&A box now. But final question from me is really around negative external perception of your culture. So that might be Glassdoor, it might be Google reviews, it might be word of mouth if you're a small business. What are some strategies for turning that around if there is a negative external perception of your culture? And Layamon, we'll start with you.
This is critical in my industry, right? Like, we're looking after people's dogs. Our reputation is absolutely everything. So, things go wrong. Over Christmas, New Year's, we had over 400 dogs in our care. Occasionally things are going to go wrong. Dogs are going to get sick. We're going to have some pretty challenging conversations with dog owners. What we've found is you've just got to be completely open and transparent about what's going on. As soon as you try, not that we would, but others in our industry that have a reputation for not being open and transparent about what's happened with their dogs in our care, that's when we see them get into trouble, and their reputation, some of our competitors' reputation may maybe not be that flash. But our approach is you've just got to be so completely open and transparent. If that involves having to remove a dog from daycare, or tell a dog owner that their dog can't come back, or having difficult conversation about a dog's behavior, that they quite often know that their dog isn't the most well-behaved dog in the world, so it's not often a surprise. But since we've taken the approach, and we've kind of done it all along, but since we've really focused on it in the last couple of years about just being completely and open and transparent about everything that happens in our care, we haven't kind of had any issues. We've been fortunate.
Yeah, and what about reviews? So, if there's something on Google, something on Glassdoor, whatever the forum might be, where there's a trend towards negative commentary about your organization, do you recommend that organizations respond? And are there any tips around the nature of the response?
Yeah, there's a couple of factors there. Firstly, we get the occasional bad review that's nothing to do with us. It's just trolls, essentially. Their dog hasn't been in our care, and as far as we know, they haven't had anything to do with us. Those ones we ignore. I mean, you can't do much about that other than report it to Google. For negative reviews of dogs that pet owners that have had dogs in our care, the language I use is we use it as an opportunity to show off how good we are. We ring the dog owner straight away. We set up a meeting. We find out, exactly what happened from their experience. We use it as an opportunity to improve, and we do everything we can to make it right. This is gonna. We haven't had a bad review in over 2 years, so we're very lucky. We've had a pretty strong reputation, but on the few occasions where it has happened in the past, that's how we've approached it.
Brilliant, thank you. And Angela, any final thoughts from you before we go to audience Q&A?
Yeah, happy to share a couple of thoughts on that. I think the first thing to recognize is that often there is a difference between perception versus perspective. What I mean by that is most times people will not have the full picture. So they won't always understand why did you make that decision. They will, because of what information they have, make up their story to explain their worldview. The important thing I think in that context is to not feel that you have to go into a defensive mode. I think there are two things you can do in this context. One is to, in the context of an external perception that's negative, actually be able to own the narrative. So if you have more information, then and you are able to share that more information to help people understand why things happen the way they do, then you should try and reclaim the narrative in the public forum rather than have other people inform the narrative for you. So I think that's one thing. And often as organizations, we can be very reactive. We just react to what other people say about us rather than actually being proactive around creating the narrative about what you stand for. Here's why we do what we do. Here's how it's different. Here's why it's different. It's okay to be different because X, Y, Z. So I think, and as long as you are comfortable that the decisions you make is from a place that is ethical and sort of with your values, it's strong integrity, then that's all you can do. You can't always have, you shouldn't account for how other people think you should do things. The second is around the difference around perspective. So often people, when they have a perception of you that's negative, you could take it as like a gift. What is this person trying to tell me that I could improve on at whether at an individual level or at an organizational level? So maybe, yes, 90% of what they say is not true and irrelevant. But what's that 10% that I can use to make my organization 10% better? And so take it as the gift that it is. Make your organization better, stronger, and more resistant to future negative feedback. So that's sort of our perspective of how to deal with that.
Yeah, there's always, well, not always, certainly don't want to say always, but there will often be perhaps an insight or something in there that could be useful and used to your advantage. Fabulous. Well, thank you both so much for sharing. I can see that we've got several questions coming through, so we'll try and get through a good number before we wrap up. The first one is, thank you for the great insight. How do you ensure employees feel connected with the team and recognized for their contributions? So perhaps, Layamon, we'll start with you.
Yeah, great question. We introduced an award a couple of years ago called We Think You're Awesome, which is just it's just a cute little certificate that we give out at our monthly staff meeting with a $50 Prezi card. It's just a way of providing a little bit of recognition for someone who's gone above and beyond over the last month. It's a little bit lighthearted as well. The other thing we introduced was a Pets in the City Young Leaders Award. Now, this is given out at our annual Christmas party every year, and it's to recognise an individual who has got outstanding leadership potential and will be a future leader of Pets in the City. It comes with a whole bunch of stuff, like we set up a mentoring program with either my wife or I have both got a lot of background in leadership training. It's a week, they're entitled to a week's training out of the office, whether that's Outward Bound or some sort of young leaders program. We'll pay for that for them. So yeah, that's been a really cool initiative that we introduced last year, and we've got two outstanding young Kiwis in that program at the moment. And yeah, they're both in their early 20s, but they're just doing so well with us, and it's really, really cool to be able to kind of really give them a bit more mentoring and professional development and recognize that talent. So yeah.
Some awesome initiatives. Love that. And Angela, what about you guys?
Well, go the other way, which is like what you do on a regular basis. And we have a group chat on Teams. And one of the things that is really cool as part of our culture is when people feel supported or when they've seen a colleague do something really well, that leaders or colleagues are very happy to just sort of send a praise and say thank you to this person. They did this for me today, or they did achieve this week. And it's sort of it's a cool way to kind of give recognition on a regular basis for people who we feel has gone often above and beyond their daily jobs.
Yeah, there's a lot that we do at Employment Hero. Two really obvious ones are we use our own platform, obviously, and so we use Employment Hero shoutouts, which is just a great way to kind of publicly acknowledge someone and say thank you almost, and give them a high five, we say. We also have a recognition framework built in as well. So if someone goes above and beyond to live one of our values and really goes kind of beyond the norm of what you would expect in their role, then their peers can nominate them. It gets reviewed and approved by someone on the performance ops team, and from there they get some hero points. So there's actually like a financial benefit to them being a fantastic team member as well. So if you're an Employment Hero user, strongly recommend checking out both of those features. The next question is, in what ways does your company promote personal growth and professional development? And maybe we'll stick with you first.
Yeah, we obviously feel that individuals have very individual needs about what they need to kind of grow as an individual in the company. So we generally sort of like use these one-to-ones or our annual reviews as a way in which to touch base with our employees to go like, what is important for you to kind of get you to where you want to get to at the end of 2025, for example. And as the longer they are with you, you can also start to pick up. Actually, I've seen that this area here you've done really well, but this area here you could work on to kind of make you a better leader or better manager or better at this part of your job, and being able to, again, as managers and leaders, be able to give that feedback, but give it in a constructive way by saying, and here's how I'll help you work through some of that. So that's kind of the way that we think about promoting growth and development.
Brilliant. And Layamon, any other tips or ideas from you?
Yeah, so we've got one thing we introduced 2 or 3 years ago was a really clear position ladder of what the qualification requirements are at each position within Pets in the City and each role, and then we've got pay steps associated with each of those positions. So making it clear that if you pass this online course in dog handling, you'll go to this position in the position ladder, which comes with this remuneration. So some people don't need the financial incentive to get on and complete those additional qualifications, but a lot of people, it's a driver. We've got a lot of it. You start as a basic animal handler, but you can actually move through by completing various online courses and such, and having pay associated with that is a good motivator for a lot of our staff.
Fabulous. Awesome. Well, I'm conscious of the time, so I will speed along to the next question. Regarding staff meetings, how do you encourage the less confident team members to engage in that forum, which can be dominated by confident personalities? Layman, sticking with you first.
We start all our staff meetings with a fun game, similar to what Angela ended her meetings with, which I thought was awesome. I'm going to take that. So we do some sort of fun game, some sort of Kahoots quiz or something like that to try and lighten the mood. We always have pizza at all our staff meetings as well. It's a bit of a Pets in the City tradition to have pizza at staff meetings. And to try and start a little bit more informally, to break the ice. It's about breaking the ice, and once people start talking, we find it generally goes well. That's what we do.
I'm a big believer of actually having meetings be facilitated well. And so that includes, and not always being able to do this well, but this is kind of the framework we like to follow, which is one, be very clear around what's the agenda of the meeting, and why whoever is invited needs to be there. And then the second is whoever is running the meeting to be facilitating in terms of if in this question, if you notice that out of the 5 people, 3 people are very confident and is always speaking their mind, but 2 are very quiet, like how do you then in a safe way just say, hey, I've noticed, Jane, that you've been really quiet. I know that you have good insights about this point here. Do you want to share a bit about your perspective? Often it's just being able to just throw the baton to them to kind of feel that they can, because because their personality means that they're not very comfortable putting their hands up to kind of speak. And then I think at the end, being very clear around what is it that has been achieved at the end of the meeting, what are the outcomes or what are the next steps, and how each person is going to be taking forward that next step. So that means that if someone's less confident, but you think they might be the best person to do this next step, that, we're clear around the room around, okay, well, Jane, I think that, based on your experience, you'd be best to kind of own this membership activation part of our campaign. So being able to kind of give people space. And then also at the end, sometimes people, again, not very comfortable in sort of speaking their mind at the meeting because maybe they take a bit more time to process that information, just giving space to kind of check in with that individual going, hey, how do you feel that meeting went? Is there anything else that you felt you wanted to share or that you had questions of? Again, giving them a space where they can maybe touch base one-to-one rather than in a meeting of like 5 people. So those are the ways in which you can continue to make sure that people who would have very valuable voices but might not necessarily volunteer that voice to have the chance to speak in different forums and different timeframes.
Yeah, some really good tips there. I will say for us as well, we're remote, so a lot of our meetings are virtual, and we've got team members in, I think, 15 different countries now. So culturally, you'll find that some people are just more confident speaking on group calls as well, perhaps, than others. A couple of things that helped us. One is being on team meetings where you've got the option to use the chat box as well as unmute and say something. Some people are more confident typing, but they feel a bit nervous maybe about unmuting and saying hello. So for any other remote organizations out there, recommend that. The other thing we do that has certainly helped is, wherever possible, sharing an agenda in advance so that employees know what the topics for discussion are. They've got time to kind of think through their response and any contributions they'd like to make in advance, and then come prepared to the meeting. Often it can just be a case of wanting a bit of time to prepare and really think through the problem or the subject before potentially they then contribute. Well, thank you ever so much, guys. We are at time, I'm afraid, so we are going to have to close things off momentarily. Just wanted to say thank you ever so much for joining us. Really enjoyed the chat with both of you, and know that this will have been super valuable for so many of our customers and other potential listeners over in New Zealand. Now, as this webinar closes, for those listening, there will be a survey that will pop up. We would love to hear your thoughts on the webinar, what worked well, what you'd like to see more of, anything that we could improve on for next time. We always review the feedback in detail, so please be honest and share your thoughts. Would really, really love to see as many of you as possible at our next New Zealand webinar, which is Navigating 2025 New Zealand Employment Law Forecast, which is on the 19th of Feb, which is with Sanlam, our employment council here at Employment Hero. I know that those ones are always hugely anticipated and much appreciated. So if you're interested, hope to see you there. Angela and Layamon, huge thank you for your time today. Really, really appreciate it, and looking forward to perhaps trying out some of your tips.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Kate.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you.